Well, this isn't good. According to the 4th Annual Women in the Workplace Survey from leanin.org and McKinsey & Company, U.S. companies have made almost no progress improving women's representation at any level since the study was first conducted in 2015. Joining us now is Betty Ann Heggie. She's a trailblazing Canadian businesswoman who just wrote a book called Gender Physics, which is timely for several reasons. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Now, gender physics is based on your theory and practice of rejecting traditional gender roles to achieve personal and professional success by balancing masculine and feminine energy. So tell us what that means.
Basically, we're labeled pink or blue, and with that, we have a whole lot of expectations that are heaped upon us. We believe that little boys should venture away from their mothers, skin their knees, and so they grow up learning how to take risks. And we teach little girls that they should sit quietly and politely by their mothers and be good listeners, and so they end up being in a support role very often. And that limits the progress of women for both men and women and their expectations. So that could be one of the things that links back to that study. But really what I'm advocating is that each and every one of us have the attributes of both the masculine and the feminine inside of us. Our problem is that we have been taught to be one or the other.
Suppress part of one for the other.
Exactly. So it limits us, and it means that we don't express who we really are. We're really all made up of a myriad of characteristics, and we should be expressing that.
Well, how do you do that, though? I mean, at my age, how would I... Although I don't think I suppress too much, and I don't think you do either. But I think many people do. But if you've been doing something for 50 years and you've been a certain way, how do you suddenly change that equilibrium?
It's a hard thing to do, but we first of all start with awareness. We have to stop and recognize that, oh, okay, this particular action that I'm doing right now is probably because early in my life, I was taught that I would be accepted by being a good listener, and maybe I really need to find my voice and speak out because I'm actually agreeing to things in these meetings that I don't feel entirely comfortable with. And so I want to express myself, so I'm going to become aware of it, and I'm going to find some ways that I can do that where I feel safe and comfortable doing it.
So, I mean, I find in the workplace, let's talk more in the workplace. We hear men are authoritative, women are bossy. Women aren't allowed to cry. That means she's weak. Men don't cry. It's like, even that phrase, suck it up and be a man.
Exactly. So we teach little boys to be unemotional, and we think that there's two kinds of leaders. We think there's masculine leaders who are independent, self-sufficient, bottom-line oriented, ready to take a risk. And then we think that we have women leaders that are nurturing and supportive and good listeners and collaborative and consensual. And we've got a multifaceted world out there, and we need to be able to use all those attributes. There's times when we want to be authoritarian, and there's times that we want to be a good collaborator, and we need to choose those times and be willing to unlock that other energy and bring it forth and use it.
If we're still talking about the workplace, from an employer's point of view, is there an advantage for the employer for his or her employees to unlock or to stop that suppression of whatever side?
Absolutely. Our real goal in business is to get the ultimate in productivity and efficiency. So that means that we need to hire people who have the right talent and put them in the right jobs and then develop that talent. But when people are suppressing who they really are to try to fit in, we lose productivity and efficiency.
Do employers recognize that?
Well, unfortunately, they probably aren't because they're not developing those women as we talk about in that initial study. So what we need to stop and think about how if we are really acting on the purpose of our organization and trying to move things forward and get the best bottom line and the most out of our employees, we need to encourage everybody to bring their whole selves to work.
So how can one then experiment with gender physics in the workplace?
Well, I think there's a number of things you can do. For example, if you're a woman and you've always spent a lot of time with women, try just spending some time with men. You're going to find they're more action-oriented. They're going to want to just move the ball forward as opposed to stop and think about people's feelings.
That's me. I'm like, I just want to get it done. I find it easier to deal with men in general in business because there's not so many meetings, not so many discussions, not so many things, to get on. I'm very blunt. I've been criticized for being too blunt, but it's a time waster for me that I just cut to the point. So that's my masculine energy.
Exactly. And so what I say is that all of us have a go-to energy. It's either masculine or feminine, and it's not determined by our biological gender. So you're probably a masculine energy woman, and so am I. Mm-hmm. And I used to joke, I had our CFO in our company, his undergraduate degree was in biology, and he used to say, Betty Ann, how women have the XX chromosome and men have the XY? The bottom half of your last X has fallen off, and it's looking an awful lot like a Y. So and there's a lot of men who have their primary energy would be feminine, but we all try to hide that a little bit in order to fit in. And that pushback that you get when people say you're being too bossy, whereas they would just say that a man is being directive and getting the job done, that's our subconscious bias that says women should be a certain way and men should be a different way. And then as women or men, we tend to adopt those attributes that we think we're supposed to have to try to fit in.
Well, what about there are women who run Fortune 500 companies or who have started companies, and obviously they do not fit in to this role.
What I would say, the research would show that these women do adopt the attributes of the masculine, because in our society right now, we have this belief that the attributes of the masculine are interchangeable with the attributes of leadership. So we believe that leaders are going to
have
get
male
done.
characteristics.
Exactly. And so then women have to exhibit those characteristics. However, we also have this belief that women have to be nurturing and supportive and good listeners. So if you're a woman who wants to be considered a leader, you have to exhibit masculine characteristics, but then you have to cloak them with a lot of feminine characteristics to be liked and accepted.
So tell us a little bit about the book. Who do you think should read Gender Physics?
Well, I wrote the book initially for women because my really goal was to try to help women get to the decision-making table. And a young man who's I consider to be very future-thinking, future-oriented, a friend of my daughter's, took me out for dinner and sat me down and said, Betty Ann, this book needs to be for men as well. We're not happy with the masculine model that we have been told to live with. And he really made me think. So I went back in thinking I was nearly finished the book, and I spent another year studying masculinity and coming up with examples. So every time I have an example for a woman, I have an example for a man.
Wow.
And I've had a lot of positive feedback from men on the book saying, I'm really pleased that this book was written for men and women, and I've really gotten a lot out of it.
It's interesting because I remember my husband, John, when I was working, doing the news on weekends, he'd look after the children. But, people would come up saying, oh, isn't that nice? You're babysitting. It's like, he's babysitting, but no, he'd say, no, I'm parenting. They're my children, right? I'm not babysitting. It's my job. But I mean, I think we do have so many preconceived notions.
And that's what happens to us. We have these preconceived notions and we put people in those boxes. And that prevents them from expressing who they really are and being able to use all the actions and attributes available.
So what happens when you unlock the energy you never knew you had?
Well, you become more balanced.
Okay.
And one of the problems that we have is if we are a man or a woman and we're used to using the attributes of our gender, that's our goal. When we get under stress or pressure and we want to, or really attached to an outcome, we'll go back to those attributes and then we'll dial them up to the extreme. And my mother used to have a saying that too much of a good thing is a bad thing. And so then those strengths become weaknesses. And then we watch people dial it up out of control. And we've seen a lot of it. We're talking a lot these days about toxic masculinity. And that's really masculinity out of balance, which is not including the feminine.
So how can you experiment with this in the workplace?
Well, I have a whole bunch of exercises in my book. So, for example, if you're a woman and you tend to be in feminine energy, which means you tend to always
acquiesce
or tend to turn to your emotions. Like, I don't like that restaurant. I just didn't feel good there. Because you're going to your emotions. You're judging things by your emotion. A masculine approach would be the restaurant was overcrowded. They didn't bring my food on time. The cost was too high. I would say, okay, if you tend to be someone who works with your feelings all the time, spend a day and try to just speak in facts.
All right, so you are going to be hosting a Twitter party on gender physics on December 13th at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. All the details are on your Facebook page. That is at Betty Ann Heggie. And where can people get your book?
My book is available from Amazon right now.
Absolutely fantastic. So thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm going to, unlock my energy. Watch out.
She said she's magical, mystical.